Hey, hey. All right. So we are rounding out everything with this last lecture. If you're following along in the PowerPoints, it is 23 Civil War 1862 to 1865. First slide up there is just an outline of the lecture. So I don't know. You don't really need that unless you just want to get it. So something changes in the fall of 1862. Again, the first line up there, most Northerners are still fighting to preserve the Union. Most Northerners are not fighting to end slavery. There are people that are, and most Northerners probably would be fine with ending slavery, but their main goal for right now is to preserve the Union. That's the thing that they're wanting to do. Now, some Northerners very, very much do not care about, the plight of enslaved people in the South. So you've got a mix of different, perspectives up in the North. Some people are, yes, let's also end slavery. Some people are indifferent, and some people honestly just do not care. And we'll talk a little bit about those folks later. But those enslaved people in the South, whether you care or not about the plight of enslaved people, those 4 million enslaved people enable whites in the South to fight, because those 4 million enslaved people do a whole lot of work that if they weren't there, that a lot of manpower that is going into the Confederate Army would be doing those things, because they're still needing to continue with agricultural work. There is a still need to move things around through, wagon drivers and stuff like that. Also, enslaved people are going to be used to build fortifications. And, if they weren't there, you would have to be using white folks to construct those fortifications. And so those 4 million enslaved people unwillingly, and I always emphasize the unwilling part, are doing work that helps the Confederacy. Agricultural work, building fortifications, or teamsters, people that move things around with wagons and stuff like that. And so in 1862, Union commanders start confiscating enslaved people, because their efforts, unwilling, as they are, those efforts are assisting the Confederacy. And so Union commanders start confiscating enslaved people. And our buddy from New Orleans, the one that did General Orders number 28, that said any woman spitting on or disrespecting or flashing or throwing things at Union soldiers or dumping chamber pots on their heads would be considered women of the town. Ben Butler is going to term these people contrabands of war. They are people that are assisting, unwilling though, the efforts of the Confederate Army, and so they're subject to legal confiscation. Butler, you don't have to remember, is a lawyer, and so he's going to couch this in legal terms, and so he's going to make the argument early on about confiscating enslaved people. And so this is going to sort of stew in the upper ranks of the Union forces and in the White House. Lincoln is going to hear about this, and we're going to kind of think about these things a little bit. So hang on to that. Stick a pin in it for later. Now, in 1862, also in the fall, Robert E. Lee, Confederate general, is going to lead the Army of Northern Virginia. You don't have to remember the names of the armies, but Lee is going to lead the Army of Northern Virginia on an invasion of Maryland. And this is significant for a couple of reasons. One, Lee is trying to bring the war to the doorsteps of the Northern people. Second thing in his head, and he's not completely out in left field, remember Maryland is a slave state. And so, and Maryland very quickly after Lincoln's inauguration is going to be under military occupation, so that Maryland does not get a chance to hold a secession convention. And so Lee thought incorrectly that he would be welcomed with open arms in Maryland, and you know, the Confederate bands, as they march into Maryland, was playing the song "Maryland, My Maryland," thinking that, you know, these people are going to welcome them. Doesn't really play out that they don't get a cold reception, but they don't get a overtly welcoming reception either. Now, as Lee is moving through Maryland, he is going to, and you don't have to remember how many, but he is going to divide his army up into three fingers. Now, he doesn't have a lot of men. He's got 40,000 men compared to McClellan's 75,000. We're not publishing these numbers, but Lee definitely is outnumbered, and he's going to divide his army up. And portion of this is for scouting. A portion of this is to foraging for resources and stuff like that. But he's going to divide his army up into three different fingers. And the idea was that they were going to divide up, forage and scout and stuff like that, and then come back together at a predetermined spot. Well, earlier, I don't know, a couple of days before, Lee disseminates all of these orders, and a mid-ranking officer is going to get a copy of these, and he's going to wrap a copy of those orders around 3 cigars and put them in his pocket. And as they're marching through the countryside, the copy of Lee's orders, the commanding general of the Army of the Northern Virginia, those copy of those orders are going to fall out of that guy's pockets. And later in the day, a Union soldier is going to happen upon these 3 cigars wrapped in a piece of paper, and he's going to pick them up, read the copy of these orders, and then these orders will ultimately get taken to the commander of the Army of the Potomac, General George B. McClellan. McClellan is a United States general. Remember, we fired Irwin McDowell and put McClellan in charge of one of the Union armies. Well, McClellan knows, holy cow, he knows that Lee's army is divided up into 3 parts, and he knows that where they're going and where they kind of are, and he has the opportunity to sort of play Confederate whack-a-mole. He probably had the time to go after one finger of that army, definitely. And he could have possibly, if he hit them really hard and really fast, he might have been able to engage that second finger and possibly, maybe destroyed them, but maybe, wore them down really, really bad through overwhelming numbers. And so he really had the chance to almost and maybe even completely destroy Lee's army back in 1862. But, once again, McClellan's fatal flaw, scribble it down because this, McClellan's fatal flaw is that he's really hesitant about being aggressive. He always overestimates the capability of enemy forces. He's very reluctant to engage his own forces. And McClellan hesitatingly engages Lee's forces at Antietam. but he does so slow that he engages one of those elements. And by the time he really kind of gets a hold of them, Lee has time to reunite his army. And so this wild advantage is going to disappear. Now on the thing there where it says McClellan at Antietam / Sharpsburg, Confederates name battles one name, Union forces name the battles another name most of the time, but not always. And so that's why I put both of those on there. On the test, I always refer to this as Antietam. Most historians, most Civil War buffs, whatever, refer to this battle as Antietam. You still got some people that kind of refer to it as Sharpsburg, but most people, if you tell them Antietam, they know what you're talking about. If it shows up on the test, it's Antietam. All right. Now, important thing, this is the bloodiest one-day battle of the Civil War. There are other battles. We'll talk about Gettysburg here in a minute. Not a whole in-depth, but we'll talk about Gettysburg. Gettysburg had 51,000 casualties, but it stretched over 3 days. And so this is the bloodiest one-day battle of the Civil War. 23,000 casualties on both sides total, and 6,000 dead. The both of those pictures are of the same place, but that you can sort of see the fence row, the double fence row in the color picture. That particular spot of the battlefield is called the Sunken Lane. And I don't know if it's just it had a lot of travel and the weight of everybody traveling on it prior to the battle sort of caused that, or if it's just a natural feature and a lot of people used that sunken area as a roadway. But the Sunken Lane was one of the heaviest spots of fighting during the Battle of Antietam. Both sides, were trying to hold on to it. And so there's a lot of fighting within that area. So much so that reporters after, and you can see the black and white image with the two guys standing up there, reporters after the battle and photographers said that you could walk the entire length of Sunken Lane, which was about a mile. The whole thing's about a mile long. They said that you could walk the whole length of Sunken Lane and never touch the ground because you would be walking on bodies that people that were killed during the battle. So it is an incredibly scene of intense fighting during the battle. Now, another thing about Antietam, both sides are going to be absolutely clobbered. Neither side really comes off with a striking victory, but Union forces hold the ground, and whoever holds the ground, technically, that is the victor of a particular battle. And so, since Union forces hold the ground there at Antietam, they are technically the victors, and Lincoln was waiting on a Union victory to announce his next policy that comes down the pike. So shortly after the Battle of Antietam, which is, technically a Union victory, but both sides just got absolutely clobbered, Lincoln is going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Now there's gray areas here, so really kind of be detailed. Basically, Emancipation Proclamation consists of that top thing. It's worded different in the original document, but for our purposes, slaves that are in any state in rebellion, slaves that are located in the Confederacy, after January 1st, 1863, will be forever free. So enslaved people that are in Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, those southern Confederate states, after January 1st, 1863, the federal government, northern government, will consider them to be forever free. Does not say a couple of things. It does not free any enslaved people in the border states. And we've talked about the border states. You don't have to remember them, but those green states, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland. Those are states where slavery is legal, but they did not join the Confederacy. So those are those green border states. Emancipation Proclamation does not apply to them. So enslaved people that are in Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland, those people are not free under the Emancipation Proclamation. Now that sounds like a jerk move, right? It sounds like Lincoln's like, hey, we're just going to free the slaves in the Confederacy, but northern enslaved people and enslaved people in the border states, you guys can go and kick rocks. He's not doing that to be a jerk. He's being pragmatic. And a lot of kind of Confederate apologists are like, oh, well, he didn't free all the slaves and stuff. The thinking Lincoln says, his primary goal is the preservation of the Union. He would love to free the enslaved people. He is an abolitionist, but his primary thing is preservation of the Union. That's his job. And if he says, hey, enslaved people in Maryland or enslaved people in Missouri or Kentucky, especially if he says that the Emancipation Proclamation applies to them, that might incite renewed interest, loyalty toward the Confederacy in those states, and it might push them into the Confederacy. Probably not, but do you really want to take that chance? And so Lincoln does not have it apply to them because there's a fear of pushing those states into the Confederacy. It probably wouldn't happen, but if you're in the middle of the war, do you want to take a chance of giving resources to your opponent? Heck no. And so that Lincoln is being pragmatic. He's really not being a jerk here. He's being pragmatic, even though that, sons of Confederate veterans and Confederate apologists like to The other thing, though, is, think about this. Do you really think that enslavers down here in Alabama are going to hear about the Emancipation Proclamation and be like, well, Lincoln said I got to free my enslaved people, so you guys have a good day? No! They're fighting an entire war for the preservation of slavery. So they're not going to just free them because Lincoln said so. That third line there is really, really important. To actually free people, the Union Army has to occupy that territory. And so at first, so far in the class, we haven't talked about it, but Union forces have captured Middle Tennessee. We have talked about Union forces occupying what is now West Virginia. We have talked about Union forces occupying New Orleans. And so places those places, enslaved people are free, but nowhere else. So the Union forces, Union military has to occupy those areas. And sometimes those lines are very, very, hard lines. You don't have to get this down, but a great example is up in Nashville, Andrew Jackson's Hermitage Plantation. Jackson's dead, but the Hermitage Plantation is still in operation, and there are still enslaved people there. Well, today, Nashville has kind of grown all the way out there, and Hermitage, the town community, whatever the heck it is, has been absorbed by Metro Nashville, but not right now. And so people that are enslaved on the Hermitage Plantation, they don't free themselves until very late in the war, like 1865. There are accounts of enslaved people from the Hermitage Plantation making their way into Nashville after the Battle of Nashville. And man, Battle of Nashville is in December of 64. And so this is really late, and Union forces occupy Nashville early in the war, and so sometimes those lines, man, they're pretty hardcore. So, big thing with the Emancipation Proclamation is it frees relatively small numbers of enslaved people immediately. Union forces are going to have to capture more and more territory for this to really, really kick in. Now, the Confederacy has some good generals, some really, really bad generals. My assessment of Robert E. Lee is that he's an okay general. It's just that the generals he comes up against early on are not good. And so there's a big kind of thing about Lee being this amazing general and stuff. I don't really buy it personally. I mean, you can have a completely different opinion of this, and that is totally cool. But it's really, Lee goes up against some really mediocre to bad generals, commanding generals. And in 63, when the Union forces start to get some really good generals on the line to counter Lee, Lee doesn't do good anymore. And so I think it's just his capability against bad generals or not as good generals kind of helps out his reputation. You don't have to get all of these people down, but I just want to kind of throw us up there. One of the major problems for the North is finding capable generals. And my brother used to say that Lincoln had Darth Vader syndrome. If you're a Star Wars nerd, you know that Darth Vader, like if you made a mistake, he would kind of choke you out and kill you. And we definitely see that in Empire Strikes Back a couple of times. But Lincoln has that issue. His generals are not performing very well. And on the one hand, he doesn't give them time to recover, but we have a war that's going on and we don't have time to make mistakes. And so you don't have to get him down, but the general up at First Bull Run was General Irwin McDowell. After that battle, Lincoln is going to fire him. He is not seen as capable. Lincoln will then appoint George B. McClellan. Remember, he kind of grows that big giant head and is reluctant to fight. After the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln is going to relieve him of command. You're not aggressive enough. We need somebody with more fire. And so after McClellan, Lincoln will appoint Ambrose Burnside to command of the Army of the Potomac. Burnside, he's aggressive, but he's not as aggressive, I think, as needed. And so Lincoln will ultimately fire Burnside. Bar trivia. Bar trivia about Ambrose Burnside. Notice he's got those really, really big mutton chops. Ambrose Burnside is where we get the term sideburns. It's because of this guy you get the term sideburns. And that is because, that's a silly kind of statement, and it's a silly idea, and it's true, and silly true statements like to show up on final exams. You don't have to get him down, but after Fredericksburg, Lincoln will fire Ambrose Burnside for some serious mistakes up there at Fredericksburg. There's a lot of hesitation and stuff like that. And Lincoln will appoint Joseph Hooker to head up the Army of the Potomac. Other bar trivia that you do not have to get down, you may have heard this somewhere before, but Joseph Hooker is not where we get the name hooker for prostitutes. The term hooker for prostitutes was around before, and during the war, Joseph Hooker popularized it. Still, you don't have to get down. This is just a fun aside. when Hooker was appointed the head of the Army of the Potomac, they were up in Washington, D.C. Over winter. And there were lots and lots of brothels and lots of bars and stuff like that. And soldiers were going out to these places and getting in all kinds of trouble and getting in all kinds of fights and stuff like that. And so Joseph Hooker relocated a lot of the brothels and a lot of the bars to one central area in Washington, D.C. And it wasn't because he privately was a very big fan of those activities, but it wasn't because he was promoting these things. It was because if it's all concentrated here, I can appoint the provost guard to keep an eye on these particular areas. Well, the press hears about Hooker moving all of the brothels to one particular area of D.C., and they take to calling that area Hooker's Division. And so that popularizes the term hooker for prostitutes. But that's Lincoln's big problem, is he can't find capable and aggressive generals. It takes a while. Unfortunately, partway through 1863, before he lands on Meade and Grant. So, on the other side, down here in the South, the blockade is becoming more and more impassable. Remember that we had the Anaconda Plan with Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, Scott's Great Snake. And it's becoming more and more impassable as the Union Navy is constructing ships, and so there are shortages. The South definitely is an agricultural society, but mostly they're growing tobacco and they're growing cotton. That's not delicious. That's not going to provide sustenance for people. And so the South is actually importing a lot of foodstuffs during the war. They're also trying to import military stuff, but that stuff's heavy. You know, rifles and cannon and shot and stuff, that stuff's all really heavy. And so a lot of the blockade runners are going to switch to light food items that makes us faster and we can sell for a lot more money. So the blockade is causing shortages in the South. And so we have something called the Richmond Bread Riots. And this pops off in the middle of 1863. And what's going on? And kind of cool, as far as a parallel anyway, not kind of cool that we all experienced it, but kind of cool, we sort of saw this during COVID. There were shortages of toilet paper and all kinds of weird stuff. And a lot of people felt like, and they were probably correct to a very large degree, some degree anyway, that the stores, the merchants were jacking up prices because we couldn't get toilet paper and they had us kind of in a quandary. And so the merchants were jacking up prices. Well, that's what a lot of the people in Richmond felt like too during this time, that there's food shortages and they feel like the merchants are taking advantage and jacking up prices. Much like COVID, there are legit shortages, and so supply and demand, if there's less supply, demand goes up, and so you're going to need to raise prices because of the shortage. But also, probably definitely some merchants did raise their prices artificially and did not lower them when supply kind of caught up during COVID and probably during this situation too. So there are a couple of reasons why those prices raised, but a lot of the people felt like this is all the merchants just being greedy, and it wasn't completely, but probably to a degree it was some of it. And so somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 women and children in Richmond, Virginia are going to come together and they are going to attack all of the stores, the merchants that have foodstuffs that they feel like are ripping them off. And so about 1,000 women and children are going to kind of form this giant mob and just make their way through Richmond. And a thing to scribble down, the Confederacy as a whole is short of food. The military is short of food. And so the authorities are going to have to dispatch troops to put this riot down of women and children. I don't think, it's been a while since I've double checked on the numbers, but I don't think anybody gets killed. I'm sure people got roughed up and cracked in the head or something, but I don't think anybody gets killed. But the Confederate government is going to have to release food supplies that were originally intended for the military. And they're going to have to release these to the public because the public is starving. And so this puts the military in kind of a worse position. They are not going to be as effective because these guys are hungry as well. There are similar bread riots throughout the Confederacy, but this is kind of the big one. This is the one that gets talked about. It's also in the Confederate capital, and so it's understandable if things are bad in the capital of the Confederacy, they're going to be bad everywhere. The next line down, MacGyver rescues the Confederacy. Probably no one really today gets that, but very, very cool. In the 1980s, you don't have to write this down. In the 1980s, there was a television show called MacGyver, and MacGyver was really, really a cool show because it was about this dude, the guy, Alan Dean something. I can't remember his last name. But the show was about this guy with cool frizzy hair, and he would get himself into all these kind of tricky situations. And he worked for something akin to the CIA. It wasn't the CIA for the show, but it was kind of like the CIA. And he refused to carry a gun for some weird reason. I think just for the show because it made sense. And he would find himself in these weird situations, and he would always have to find random crap and be able to get out of it, And so he would have a pen cap, a paper clip, and a little bit of Post-it notes. And dude would make like a glider and fly off the top of a mountain or some kind of nonsense like that. But it was cool because he would sort of take just random resources that he had access to and find a solution. And so I thought that was a neat show. I watched it a lot. But also the Confederacy's kind of in that situation. They are strapped for resources, especially with that blockade tightening. And so they're really, really having some difficult problems. One of the things that they are absolutely short of is thread. They're producing cotton, but those cottons go to mills in the north or in England, and they're spun into thread and woven into cloth and stuff like that. So they're producing raw cotton. They don't really have a solid means to turn that stuff into thread. And during the war, you need a lot of thread because you've got a lot of soldiers that are getting wounded, and a lot of them are suffering amputations, and so you've got to sew those things up. And so surgeons are having shortages of thread. Well, one thing they start thinking about is, hey, there's all these horses running around, and horse tails have hair on them about that long, right? Or longer. And so they decide, some of the surgeons start using the horse hair from horse tails as thread. And horse hair is really, really coarse, and it's really, really stiff. And so to deal with that, some of the surgeons figure out, look, if you take this and you dip it in boiling water for just a second, and then you pull it out, it's really, really flexible, and you can sew up wounds with it. And they don't know why. At the time, they do not know why. Germ theory does not pop up in the medical community for about 10 years. 1875-ish is when we start thinking about there's microbes and bacteria and viruses that cause disease. But they do notice that the people that were being sewn up with horsehair are getting less infections. And the people that were using thread with, the thread's dirty anyway, but then I kind of run it through my mouth to get a point on it before I can run it through the eye of the needle. Those people are getting more infections for some reason. And the people that we're using horsehair on are getting less infections. And they're not making the connection just yet, but they are noting that something is going on. These people are getting less infections. These people are getting a little bit more higher rates of infection. So there's that. This pressed into service is going to result in some interesting thoughts and discoveries for the medical community. Another thing that the Confederacy is short of is gunpowder. Gunpowder is made, you don't have to get this down, but it is made with charcoal and sulfur and something called saltpeter. And charcoal and sulfur, charcoal's easy to find. You can produce that. Sulfur is a little bit more difficult, but it is available. Saltpeter is a little bit harder to run across. And one place that saltpeter is available is urine. If you put a bunch of urine outside and the liquid evaporates off, the urea crystals have a pretty decent concentration of saltpeter in them. And so in Richmond, there are gunpowder factories scattered throughout Richmond. And the Confederate government there in Richmond is going to start collecting urine every morning. They will send wagons out to the people of Richmond to collect urine. And they will allow the liquid to evaporate off, and they'll scrape the urea crystals out of the container, and they'll take that stuff to the gunpowder factories. A newspaper editor in Richmond around 63, 64 possibly, commented one time that whenever a woman in Richmond lifts her skirts, she's actually shooting a Yankee, because they're getting urine to produce gunpowder. You don't have to get down the YMCA or the U.S. Christian Commission, but do get down Anthony Comstock. So this happens on both sides, but more so for Northern soldiers because they tend to have cash. But when the war starts out, both sides are sending masses and masses and masses of young men away from home from the first time. And these guys are 18 to 20 to 25. Some of the older people are in their 30s, but they usually don't, quite last that long on the campaigns. But you've got a lot of young men that are off unsupervised with their peers who are going to enjoy encouraging them to engage in ribaldry. And so a lot of young men are going to get into all kinds of sort of trouble that they wouldn't really have gotten into back home, because the community is sort of watching, and will tell on you if you're engaging in all kinds of stuff. And so lots of young men are going to bars. Lots of young men are going to the brothels and engaging in gambling and all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't have felt as free to do back home. And so various groups are going to pop up or become larger during the Civil War. The YMCA, the Young Man's Christian Association, is going to pop up. We also have the United States Christian Commission that pops up, and they're trying to sort of police these young men. They're trying to sort of hold religious services in camps and trying to keep these guys sort of on the straight and narrow kind of a thing. One of these people that is very, very dedicated to religious ideology is a guy named Anthony Comstock, and that's a picture of Mr. Comstock there on the side. Comstock was really super on the straight and narrow. He did not drink. He did not smoke. He definitely was not going and seeking out the brothels or anything like that. And after the war, we've actually talked about him a little bit earlier during the women's rights stuff that we talked about. After the war, Anthony Comstock is going to be pivotal in pushing a law called the Comstock Act. And the Comstock Act forbids sending obscene material through the mail, the law that Victoria Woodhull got in trouble for. Remember, she was sending stories about Henry Ward Beecher's affair. Well, during the Civil War, pornography becomes an issue. And we, as a society, are gaining the ability to take relatively low-cost photographs, and within a few minutes, one of those photographers is like, hey, let's get people to take off their clothes. And so you can mail order pornography during the Civil War. A friend of mine that helped me with my dissertation, she gave me some images and stuff like that for my dissertation. But she actually collects, photographic nudes from the Civil War. Well, these were available, and so Anthony Comstock was trying to sort of clamp down on mail order pornography, and that's what becomes the Comstock Act. It leads to all kinds of stuff later on down the line. Now, on the issue of prostitution, this is something I wrote my dissertation on, prostitution during the Civil War. I personally do not feel like these people in this situation, you have to, I think, have a case-by-case basis. But in this situation, I don't find these people immoral. Other historians have called what's going on right here survival sex, and I think that is a perfect name for it. These women don't have resources. They're at a time when women do not have very many career opportunities anyway. Throw a war on top of that, and there's less career opportunities for women. And so this is one of the very, very few things they can do to feed themselves. And if they have children, to feed those children. And so I think survival sex is a perfect term for what's going on here. Now, this you don't have to get these numbers down or anything like this. This is just a shirt maker, their breakdown of how much money that they are going to make a week in a large city before the war. During the war, there are lots and lots of unemployed women. And so, before the war, when things are chill, a shirt maker might produce 2 shirts. It might take her a week to produce 2 shirts a week by hand, and she might make $1 a week working 70 hours. And now, to put that into perspective, a private in the United States military and in the Confederate military make $14 a month. And so working 70 hours a week, this woman is making $4 a month. That's incredibly difficult to make ends meet. And so for room and board, she might spend 50 cents a week. She might have some other expenses for 30 cents a week, and so she has 20 cents remaining. That's not, that's okay, but holy cow. And that's 70 hours a week. And that's if you're healthy. And, think about if, the person gets sick or something and can't work for a couple of days, or here in the South especially, women that were making shirts and stuff like that, or seamstresses on the whole. In Richmond during the war, thousands of women are going to move into the city because the army is marauding. Both armies are marauding in the countryside. And so they don't have support, and so they're going to need to find something to do. And labor, the supply of labor is very high, and so wages are going to be squished. And so survival sex is going to be it for a lot of women, unfortunately. So during the war, a lot of women are going to have the loss of a primary wage earner because, again, this is a time period where there's not career opportunities for women. As an aside, there's my book over there. Hey, do not go and buy my book, all right? But you can if you're really, really interested. It's available in both of the libraries, and at the Decatur Calhoun Library, and I'm pretty sure there's a copy over in the Huntsville Calhoun Library. So if you do want to read it, and there are pictures inside, but if you do want to read it, it's available in the library. Please don't go buy it at all. I'm definitely not trying to sell it. What's kind of cool is the picture on the cover there, and this is not a test question. This is just me kind of having fun. The picture on the cover there was colorized during the war, right? You could color tint. Sometimes you might run across your grandparents or your great-grandparents' photographs, and it was a time where everything was black and white, but some of those are colored. Some artists will color tint photographs, so they'll take a black and white picture and then color tint it. On top of that, two of those women are topless, and we sort of put the subtitle ribbon over them to, I don't know, I felt like if you pick this book up at the bookstore or something like that, you maybe shouldn't see that unless you want to. And I didn't want someone that wasn't expecting that to be confronted by some topless women. So I suggested let's put that over there. But super cool is that is one half of the picture. The what they're doing around the time is they have 3D photography. And so you put two pictures right next to each other, and they're kind of offset a little bit, and you put it in something called a stereoscope. It's like these big binoculars, and you move it back and forth, and you get to a certain distance, and it pops for you, and it looks like it is a 3D image. And so, 5 minutes after we're creating photography on a semi-industrial level and bringing the cost down, we're creating pornography. And then a couple of minutes after that, we're creating 3D pornography. It's kind of a wild idea. But up in Nashville, the 1860 census recorded there were about 207 prostitutes. At the time, you would note your occupation, and up in Nashville, 207 women recorded that they were prostitutes. During the war, and especially after Union forces occupy Nashville, that jumps up to 2,000. And that's an insane number because it's just the need. If you are interested, from the brothel district in Nashville at the time was 2nd Avenue and Church Street to 4th Avenue and Church Street, right there along the river. It's 2nd Avenue to 4th Avenue and Church. Those several blocks were the brothel district. But 1862, when the Union forces occupy Nashville, there are 30,000 soldiers. And here's the scary thing. No one is really practicing safe sex. There are condoms that are available. You can mail order condoms, but those are expensive. They're rare. And so a lot of people are going to catch a couple of different sexually transmitted infections. This is the capital of Washington, or in Nashville. The brothel district is right down there. Anyway, holy cow, we've got to do something. There is an epidemic of sexually transmitted infections. You do not have to remember which ones that there are, but there is an epidemic of sexually transmitted infections in Nashville. Lots of gonorrhea, lots of syphilis. And about 40%, holy cow, there's 30,000 people, 30,000 soldiers up there. So what is that, like 17,000? Yeah, that's about right. No, it's not right. About 13,000. Sorry, I was going over 50%. We're below 50%. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 13,000 soldiers are infected. That is going to reduce your fighting force, your fighting capability. And so we need to do something. And so the provost marshal is kind of like the military police. They come up with a solution. We are going to load up as many sex workers onto trains and send them north. And they load all these women up onto a train and they send them north up to Louisville, Kentucky. And they drop them off. And Louisville is under military occupation, so the commander there just kind of has to take them. And then the trains come back. Well, there's not as big of a garrison up there. There's not as many soldiers up there in Louisville. And so there's not as many customers. And so these women are going to make their way back to Nashville over the next, couple of weeks to a couple of months. That's not going to work. And so a couple of months later, the provost marshal has another idea. Maybe we don't go far enough. Maybe we didn't take them far enough to the north so that we can get them out of our hair. And it doesn't take very many, but I think this is an attempt on this. But for a second time, we're going to ship all these women out. And so they decide this time we're going to try a riverboat. And I kid you not, I swear this is absolutely the name of the boat. They are going to load these women up on a riverboat called the Idaho. Now, they load up, you don't have to get it down, but they load up 111 women onto the Idaho, and they take them upstream and try to find places to offload them, and no city will take them. No city will accept offloading of 111 sex workers. To be fair, there is a high chance that you are introducing sexually transmitted infections to your population, and so no one wants that. And so no city agrees to accept them, and so the Idaho will ultimately return back to Nashville to offload these women. Well, that's not going to work. And so what happens, and scribbly down some awesomeness, the provost guard, the military police up there in Nashville, are going to legalize prostitution in Nashville. And a similar program is going to kick off in Memphis. Every 2 weeks, a sex worker has to go and be inspected by a surgeon. And she will get a pass, just like the pass that is photographed right there for Miss Annie Johnson. And you pay, I think it was 50 cents for your inspection by the surgeon, and that pays for the program. And you get a pass that says that you are free from disease. And if you do not show your pass, like it says right there for Miss Johnson, you're confined to the workhouse. But it works. It works, and it cuts down on the transmission of sexually transmitted infections in Nashville and in Memphis. So both of these programs are going to remain going for the entirety of the war. So we're going to pause right there and pick up in just a minute for the second half of this lecture. Hey, we're back. I found coffee. All right, so Nashville and Memphis again operate a successful, brothel legalization endeavor during the war. Now, Other women during the war, this is not a lot, comparatively, but other women during the war are going to find other means to support themselves, support their ideology, go off to war with a husband, father, cousin, friend, whatever the heck. It is estimated, we don't have hard numbers on that, but it is estimated that somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500 to 1,000 women during the Civil War dressed as men and enlisted in the military. The reason that it's, 500 to 1,000 is that we kind of have, snapshots here and there of different women that were discovered. One, you don't have to get down the couple I'm going to rattle off, but one was Private Lyons Wakeman. Private Lyons dressed as a young man, enlisted in the military, and went off to war, and very cool, wrote letters to their parents throughout their service. They were killed during the war, and their parents later on sort of sent those letters off to have them bound and sold as a book. And so if you want to, you can easily find the Diary of Private Lyons Wakeman and pick that up for fairly cheap on Amazon or another bookstore that delves into the Civil War stuff. I don't know if you can just pop into Barnes and Noble or something and expect to really see it on the shelf. Other women are discovered in a variety of ways. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 or 10 get pregnant, and that's kind of odd when your messmate starts showing and you weren't expecting that. A number of women are wounded in the fighting, and as the surgeon undresses them to treat that wound, discovers that they are not biologically a male. There's at least one that I know of that is a really, to me, a really interesting case up at near Memphis at the Shiloh battlefield. The fighting up there was early in the war. I think it was 1862 when the Battle of Shiloh happened, and lots and lots of casualties on both sides. And after the war, in the early 1900s, maybe 1903, I think, we look it up if you want. But after the war, like I said, I guesstimating in like 1903 or something like that. These battlefields are huge, and development happens, and after the war, somebody that lived on the battlefield, their house was on the battlefield, they were out digging in their flower garden and their flower bed, and as they dug down, they ran into a mass grave of about 5 or 6 different skeletons that they run across. So they contacted the National Park Service. Since it's on the battlefield, it's probably Civil War remains. National Park Service comes out and they excavate, and it's determined that one of those skeletons was a woman, that dressed as a man and was mortally wounded, and was just buried without anybody ever probably knowing that it was, a biological woman serving. So it's kind of wild. But one of my favorite accounts of a woman serving is the story of Albert Casher. And Albert Casher was born in Ireland, Jenny Hodgers. So Casher was born a woman, and probably, I think, somewhere around 11 or 12, somewhere in there, Jenny Hodgers started dressing as a male and started using the name Albert Casher. I've heard this pronounced cashier. I think I've more often heard it pronounced Casher, which is not quite the way it's spelled, but who cares? And Casher, really cool, enlisted with the 95th Illinois and served for all of the war. I think for most if not all of the war. And at the end of the war in 1865, mustered out along with the rest of the 95th Illinois. And Casher continued to live as a man. And if you think about it, even if you get away from, gender identity issues and stuff, and there's a lot of speculation that does play in, but since Casher didn't leave, any diaries or anything or writings, we can't really super speculate, but it seems possible that this person was trans. But anyway, Casher after the war continued to live as a man, and if you think about it, though, look at the opportunities. Women can't vote. Women can't drink in bars if they want to. It's acceptable, people in bars. If a woman's in a bar, she's going to be regarded as a prostitute, as a sex worker. Women have very limited career opportunities. Women are going to be looked at as suspect if they live by themselves. And living as a man, Casher is able to do all of those things. Able to vote, live as a man, go to bars if they wanted to, work as a handyman. That's not a woman's career right now. And live alone and have not anybody really question that. And so, but Casher is going to live as a man. And later in life, and I'm not sure exactly how old Albert Casher was when this happened, but later in life, Casher moves into an old soldiers' home, and there's those around. After the Civil War, as these guys age, there becomes sort of retirement homes, and a lot of places are going to construct old soldiers' homes. There's one up in Nashville. There's several here in Alabama. And up in Illinois, Casher is going to live at an old soldier's home. Well, in 1911, Albert Casher is walking down the street and is accidentally hit by a car. Oh, by the way, I just looked at my notes. 1934 is when that uncovering of the grave in Shiloh happened, just in case. But 1911, Albert Casher was hit by a car or a truck, and it broke Albert's leg. And when the doctor comes to check that out, Albert Casher is biologically a woman. And so at the old soldiers' home, this individual fought for the Union. They fought with the 95th Illinois. They are definitely a soldier. And so the old soldiers' home is going to continue to let them live there. But gender norms at the time, women do not wear pants. And so the administration is going to try to force Casher to wear dresses. And in something that I find truly remarkable in terms of acceptance and self-determination, on championing that kind of a stuff, the surviving members of the 95th Illinois, who are also fairly elderly at this point, surviving members of the 95th Illinois go to that old soldier's home, and they demand, and they get results, and it's really cool. They demand, look, if our messmate Albert Casher wants to wear pants and wants to wear guys' clothing, damn it, you're going to let him wear it. And you're not going to force this person to wear dresses if they don't want to. And the administration of the old soldiers' home relents and lets Albert Casher dress the way that they want to dress. And I find that super cool, remarkable, and absolutely groovy in 1911 that people are defending their friends and defending someone that wants to live the life that they want to live. I think that's absolutely rock and roll before rock and roll existed. So, all right. Getting back to actually fighting the war. Well, my coffee's dripping. In July of 1863, we are going to have the Gettysburg Campaign. And once again, Confederate General Robert E. Lee is going to lead his army up into the north, and they will go up into Pennsylvania. And while they are in Pennsylvania, they will go, some parts of his army actually go to the town, small, very tiny little hamlet of Gettysburg. And while they're at Gettysburg, they will stumble upon a small bit of the Union Army under the command of George Gordon Meade. You may have heard this, that the Lee's Confederate Army was up there in Gettysburg looking for shoes. No, there's not a Nike factory located in this very tiny town of Gettysburg. I think that sort of myth gets started because a lot of the Confederate Army were barefoot. They were struggling as far as any kind of supplies. And so a lot of them were walking barefoot into Pennsylvania. And so I think that someone was like, oh, wow, a lot of them were barefoot, so they must have been looking for shoes. I'm sure if they would have found some shoes, that'd have been cool, but nobody thought that there was like a Nike or a Reebok factory up there in Gettysburg. They were looking for other supplies and all kinds of stuff. They were also looking for African Americans that they could enslave. There were standing orders that if you capture an African American, on the Gettysburg Campaign, those people could be sold into slavery. And notice how I said sold into slavery. It didn't matter if they had been enslaved before. This is a slave hunt, kind of in part. But the two armies, though, they're just sort of these lead elements that tangle into each other by accident up there at Gettysburg, and they both latch on. This was not a planned confrontation or anything like that. They stumbled into each other, they latched on, and then Meade is going to bring the rest of his army up, and Lee is going to bring the rest of his army up. While both armies are concentrating there in Gettysburg, a civilian, John Burns. John Burns is in the picture right there. Mr. Burns is about 70 years old at this time, and he is very cool. This is 1863, and John Burns is a veteran of the War of 1812. And I don't know if that's his original flintlock musket, but that does look, in the picture, that does look like a flintlock musket there. Pretty sure it is a flintlock. Anyway, he has his original flintlock musket from the War of 1812. It's antiquated technology at this time, but he has his old original flintlock musket from the War of 1812. He has his original uniform, and holy cow, it still fits, from the War of 1812. And when these Confederates enter his town, John Burns, this 70-year-old man, is going to put on his old uniform from the War of 1812, and he will grab his flintlock musket, and he will march out and join the Union lines. He is not interested in these Confederates out there on his lawn. And kind of, sort of cool, but a little bit, I don't know, maybe bullying, ageism. It's not really a thing at the time. But he walks into the Union lines, and the soldiers in these lines are like, hey, old man, you need to go home. You're going to get hurt. This is absolutely not the place for you in the slightest. And I mean, look at that guy. You're not going to tell him what to do. And Burns refuses to go anywhere. And at some point, and this is why I'm a little bit suspect that that's his original flintlock, but it might be. He might have put it someplace. At some point, he does either exchange or he picks up a modern rifled musket. And he is going to fight for the better part of the day with the Union forces up there at Gettysburg. These have got to be flesh wounds. They've got to be really, really light wounds, because a mini ball does some nasty, nasty stuff to the human body. But he is supposedly wounded something like 3 to 5 times. And by, sort of late afternoon on July the 1st of 1863, he will leave the Union lines and go back home. I can't, these have got to be just kind of a scrape or something, because a mini ball, literally, if it hits a long bone, it shatters up and down. And so the only option, for that today, really, if you're interested in undergoing a lot of lots and lots of surgeries, they could possibly, do a bone graft and kind of plug in a fake bone. But a lot of times, even today, the option is amputation, and that's it, because you've destroyed about 7 or 8 inches of bone. So that's why I'm thinking he had to, it's just like a grazing wound or something. But, not insulting the dude. But very cool. This is in July. In November, later in 1863, Abraham Lincoln goes to Gettysburg for the dedication of the National Cemetery there in Gettysburg. And Lincoln asks to meet the hero of Gettysburg, John Burns. He asks to meet him by name. And that's really, really cool. The news of John Burns has kind of gotten out to the rest of the country a little bit. So on the second day of Gettysburg, our buddy pal, Daniel Edgar Sickles. Remember earlier in the semester, Dan Sickles killed his wife's boyfriend, Philip Barton Key. By the way, he and Teresa are still married. She will pass away from tuberculosis. I think she passes in 1869, so they're still a couple until her death in 1869. I think she dies at like 31 or something. It's really sad. But on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, I'm not going to do the troop movements and stuff on there, but Sickles, if you can kind of follow the cursor, I don't know if the cursor is going to show up. Sickles is in this little point in the blue Union line there towards, the left side of your screen on the map there. And he has brought his soldiers up because they were in kind of a low-lying area. And he didn't want to be there because that's a dangerous spot to be. And while he is arguing with someone else about their position, a solid shot cannonball is fired from the Confederate side. You can't aim one of these this much, but a solid shot cannonball comes in and it strikes Sickles in the leg. And that is either a recreation or the original lower leg of Daniel Edgar Sickles. It knocks the crap out of it. It is going to destroy the knee because it sweeps it like that. And I don't have any reason to doubt it, but allegedly Sickles' leg was kind of, the lower half of his leg is kind of dangling, sort of waving in the breeze. And he is put on a stretcher to be carried to the rear to undergo. He will have his leg amputated, but he will be put on a stretcher and taken to the rear. And before he is removed from the field, he supposedly props himself up on an elbow, lights a cigar, and urges his men to keep on fighting. Kind of a really, really interesting sort of take. He will have his leg amputated. Scribbling down for some weirdness, after his leg is amputated, he will, I don't know where he gets this, or it seems like there's more important things going on, but somehow he is able to procure a small wooden box, and he is going to mail, because you can mail anything, he is going to mail his leg that has been amputated to the United States Army Medical Museum. And kind of cool, if you ever go to the United States Army Medical Museum, you can see Daniel Edgar Sickles' leg. Also, this happens on July the 2nd of 1863. Whenever possible that he is in the area, supposedly Daniel Sickles would visit his leg at the museum every July the 2nd. If you're into the ghost story stuff, supposedly, and I like ghost stories, but I don't, whatever. Supposedly, some people at the Army Medical Museum have said that they've seen a cloudy, misty figure in front of the case of Sickles' leg, sometimes on July the 2nd, like he's still visiting or something like that. Who knows? But kind of a fun sort of little thing. Anyway, on July the 3rd, and this is the only battle that I do this for, but on July the 3rd is the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg, and Robert E. Lee is going to order George Pickett to launch an assault on the middle of the Union lines. And so on the map there in red, that is Pickett's division, and he is going to push into the middle of the Union lines. Scribbly down kind of a thing. This is known at the time, and a lot of historians like to call this even today the high water mark or the high tide of the Confederacy. So high water mark / high tide of the Confederacy. And it's kind of tragically, it is like a big wave. They're going to march over a mile of open ground up into the face of the Union forces, and they get there. They get up to those Union forces, and by the time they get there, they've taken 50% casualties. Pickett is going to start out with about 5,000 men in this division, and they're going to walk up to this stone wall that's at the Union lines, and they're going to take 50% casualties making their way to there, and then they melt back like a receding tide. And I think that imagery of the high tide is really, really apt here. After Pickett's charge, the fortunes of the Confederacy are really just going to spiral. This is July of 1863, and we're just on a downhill spiral, watching the Confederacy crumble over the next, year and a half, almost 2 years. So they're really, really kind of melting at this point, and in kind of a downward spiral after Pickett's charge, that high water mark of the Confederacy. Something else, a couple of things before you get down actually photography during the Civil War. Something else. Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you wrong numbers. For Pickett's charge, 13,000 men step off, and only about 6,500 are going to return. So I was about half off on my numbers. Sorry about that. You don't need those numbers for the exam, but before you get to photography, something else during the Battle of Gettysburg is, both armies are going to retreat from this area over the next couple of days very quickly. The Confederates are going to leave on July the 3rd, and the Union forces are going to try to pack up and sort of give pursuit, but they are beat up almost just as bad as the Confederates, and so they're not really going to be able to give a solid pursuit and get there very fast. But both armies have largely left. And after the battle, this particular battle had about 50,000 casualties. There are a tremendous amount of wounded. There's a tremendous amount of dead humans. There's also somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5,000 dead horses and mules. There are lots and lots of discarded artifacts that are going to remain on the battlefield as well. There are, bayonets and rifles and blankets and portions of uniforms. There's also unexploded artillery rounds. And in the weeks and months after the Battle of Gettysburg, the local teenagers, teenage boys especially, because we are not really super intelligent at that age. I don't know about you guys. I was an idiot at 18, 16, 17, 15, 50. But the teenage boys of Gettysburg are going to spend, the rest of the weeks and months scouring the battlefield for all kinds of interesting oddities and stuff like that. And when they would uncover an unexploded artillery shell, a very fun thing to do would be to build a small campfire and then throw the shell into the campfire and absolutely run like hell. And, shortly after you throw that thing in the campfire, and hopefully these young men got a good distance away, there was a tremendous explosion. Like, these guys could have easily killed themselves doing this stuff. But over the next several months, randomly, there's just random explosions around the community of Gettysburg where these crazy teenage boys were throwing artillery shells into the campfires and stuff like that. Another thing that is going to happen, and this happens actually immediately after the battle, is photographers will descend upon the battlefield. And this happens during every major battle during the Civil War. And a thing is that I've only seen like 2 moving images that were captured and photographed during the Civil War. And the problem is we have cell phone cameras, so this isn't going to quite make sense. But when we had film in cameras, you had high-speed film and low-speed film. And low-speed film is if everybody's just kind of sitting around really still. And you had to have high-speed film to be able to capture like a car going by or a plane flying by or something like that, or somebody running, because there's a lot of motion. And if you try to take a picture with low-speed film, it'll be a blur. Well, we're operating on super low-speed film. We're doing glass plate photography here, and everybody has to stay absolutely holy cow still during photography. And so you don't even have, I've seen like 2 pictures of soldiers marching, and it's neat because they're sort of ghostly and they're all blurred into like a kind of a fog, but you can't get action shots. And so there's no photographs of a battle going on. That just doesn't really exist during the war. And so Mathew Brady is one of the most famous photographers during the war. Abraham Lincoln sits for Mathew Brady a couple of times. Well, the problem is camera equipment in 1863 is extremely fragile. It's extremely heavy. It's extremely bulky, and so it's a pain in the butt to move this stuff around. And so Brady would get the term, would stage photographs. They weren't completely fake, and they're definitely not photoshopped. That doesn't exist yet. But he would stage photographs because this stuff is so heavy and cumbersome and fragile. And one of my favorite examples of him staging photographs comes out of Gettysburg, and it's these 2 images right here. This is the same group of soldiers, and you can kind of see they've numbered the similarities, the similar issues. in each picture. And what Brady did was he put his camera down and he took a picture of one of, of those guys and said, hey, this is a group of 5 dead Confederates at the Battle of Gettysburg. And then he picked his camera up and walked all the way around to the other side and took another picture, and he sold that picture as, this is a group of 5 Union soldiers at Gettysburg. He does the same thing. He sets up shots. He moves bodies around during, in the days after the battle. So it is kind of interesting. I don't quite like to say he faked them, because those issues happened and there were people fighting there, but he did, stage these to get better stuff going down anyway. There are also, so that kind of gets us out of Gettysburg. There are also African American soldiers that serve during the Civil War. These are going to be in the North. Now in the South, various soldiers will bring their enslaved people with them to serve as sort of a body servant. If you are an officer, you can bring someone with you, an enslaved person, and they're going to cook your meals and do camp work and stuff for you and stuff like that. And later, those people, and this is much, much later, like in the 1890s later, some of those people will still be around and will qualify for pensions because they served, with the Confederate Army. They did stuff with the Confederate Army. And because they were allowed to serve as pensions, a lot of times, holy cow, actually, a lot of times, groups like the Sons of Confederate Veterans, those kind of mythology groups, not real history, will claim that, oh, look, there are African American soldiers that served with the Confederacy, so it can't be about slavery. No, you guys, those people were enslaved. They had no choice. But later, some laws change, and they're able to collect a pension for their military service. That military service was involuntary. But, Confederate apologists will point to that and say, oh, look, they served with the Confederacy. No, not exactly. They did serve with the Confederacy, but this was not a voluntary thing. Now, up in the North, you do have volunteers. And some volunteers from the South will volunteer in the Northern armies. So, along with the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States military will open up for African American soldiers. And these will be organized into the USCT, the United States Colored Troops. You also, don't worry about it for the test or anything, but you also have United States Colored Infantry, which is what Hiram Matthews is in. But for test purposes, Hiram Matthews is in the USCT. It's fine. Now, super cool. Hiram Matthews, the reason why I bring him up in particular, that particular name, if you go to the south end of campus, just across the street from the convenience store, there's a group of pine trees there. And there's the graveyard on the other side. And if you look in those pine trees, there's a little fence. And that's the grave of Hiram Matthews. And I think I've mentioned him before, but Matthews was enslaved up on Luke Matthews's plantation up there next to Bucky's. And in 1860, the fall-ish of 1862, could have been early 1863, Union forces were in this area. And Hiram Matthews escaped from the plantation. Remember, Emancipation Proclamation, if the Union forces are in your area and you can get to them, they will protect you. And so Hiram Matthews escaped to Union lines, and then he enlisted in the Union Army. And he will go up and fight in the Battle of Nashville. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides, very, very super briefly. And after while he's up in Nashville, he is going to learn to read and write. You guys, that's a crime in Alabama. Alabama, at this time, it is 100% legal to teach a free or enslaved person to read and write. You're not allowed to teach any African Americans to read and write in Alabama during this time period. And so Matthews, while he is up in Nashville, will learn a little bit how to read and write. It's really, really cool, because when he enlists in the Union military, in the Union Army, he doesn't know how to read and write. And so he signs his name with an X. And I've got copies of his enlistment papers here. And while he is up in Nashville, every single month you have to fill out a muster roll. And, this is how much you get paid, were you here, and what kind of expenses did you have for the military. And partway through that, he starts signing his name on his muster roll. And he does sign his name when he musters out of the United States military in mid-1866. And then he comes back here to Decatur, and he enrolls in a freedman's school. It's not the Freedmen's Bureau School. It's a freedman's school. I forgot what the full name of it is, but it's part of the Methodist Church. They start doing freedmen's schools, and learns how to fully read and write, and becomes the pastor of King Memorial United Methodist Church over there in Decatur. That's the name of it today. And really, really cool. We have his pension records later, where he applies for a pension from the United States military, and he's writing his full accounts in there. And that's absolutely fantastically cool when you have one individual and you can kind of trace their story through all this stuff. So that's Hiram Matthews. And that's really, really super awesome. And his grave, again, it's just down there on campus in this little fence. Anyway, in 1862, USCT forces were organized into supply, garrison, and labor units. There was a really big conscious decision not to put these guys into combat. Even at the time, a lot of people in the North, at this time, we have rolled in freeing the enslaved people into the cause of the North, but there's still a lot of people that have, stupid racist ideology. And so a lot of people in the North thought that African American soldiers were very cowardly. If someone shot at them, they're all going to take off running. They're not going to stand and fight or anything like that. And so there's a heavy duty reluctance to put them into combat. There's also at times, some political ramifications to consider, I suppose. But that's the big thing. There's just a hesitancy to feel like these people could be relied on in a combat situation. Now, some officers. Now, at the beginning, all of these regiments of African American soldiers are going to be led by white officers. Stupid racist ideology that, these people cannot lead themselves. And so they will be commanded by white officers. And some of those white officers, as they train with these guys, they realize that there's not any cowardness among them. They have enlisted with the intent to free the African American race from enslavement, and they are wholly in on this, and there's not, any cowardness to be found. And one of these officers is Colonel Robert Shaw. And Robert Shaw commands the 54th Massachusetts. If you've ever watched the movie Glory, that's what we're centering on right here. And Shaw really, really pushes to get the 54th into combat so that he can show the country, the United States government, the military, everybody, that these guys are brave and they're absolutely capable. And he finally gets his wish also in July of 1863 off of the coast of South Carolina. This is a different army than the army that is up there in Gettysburg. So don't think that they went from Gettysburg down to South Carolina like hoofing it real super fast. No, this is a different army. But the 54th is going to lead the charge in July of 1863 on the Confederate fort at Fort Wagner. And the 54th will take 50% casualties, including Colonel Shaw. So Colonel Shaw is going to lead his men on this charge. He is going to be killed, as well as about 50% of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And I don't know what their combat strength was in 1863, but usually a regiment is about 1,000 to 1,200 infantrymen during the Civil War. And so if they were at full strength, this is 500 people that were killed or wounded and captured. As an insult, the Confederates, the Union forces are going to fall back and they are not going to capture Fort Wagner. And so the Confederates hold the field. And as an insult to Colonel Shaw, the Confederates are going to bury him in a mass grave with his men. And again, this is an insult. This is at a time when it's very difficult to find an integrated cemetery. You can't find that, and in many places it's illegal to have an integrated cemetery. And so the Confederates are going to want to insult Colonel Shaw for leading these African American soldiers and bury him in a mass grave with them. And kind of cool, sort of fast forwarding a little bit. After the war is over, Shaw's parents come down to South Carolina because they want to see where their son is buried. And lots of families do this. If they have the means, you do see a lot of travel after the Civil War. You also see a lot of people, if they are able to identify the remains, will relocate remains after the Civil War. But Shaw's parents come down to South Carolina to Fort Wagner to see where their son's remains are. And the person that's showing them around asks them, and it's not uncommon to do this. The person that's showing them around, though, asks them, do you want us to exhume the body so that you can take it back up to Massachusetts to be buried in the family plot? And they don't. His parents take it as a great honor that he is buried with the men that he led on this assault on Fort Wagner. And his mom, this is a beautiful line. You don't have to get the quote down, but his mom says, quote, "We can imagine no holier a place than that in which he lies among his brave and devoted followers, nor which for him better company. What a bodyguard he has." That's phenomenally moving. And his parents, sort of turn that insult around that was intended by the Confederate forces there at Wagner. And they're like, no, it's awesome that he's right there, and that's where we're going to leave him. And that's a cool, I don't know, I like those little, snippets of life. Now in the Eastern Theater, we're just about wrapped up. This Civil War kind of takes a while. In the Eastern Theater, Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, is a United States general. He is going to encounter Confederate general, along with their respective armies, John Bell Hood. That's Sherman on. He is over the black and white photograph, and then Hood is over the map. I don't know. I was going to say right and left, but I'm like, I don't know what how you're seeing this. Sherman is going to capture the city of Atlanta, and a big thing. When he is going to assault the city of Atlanta, Sherman is, after he destroys the city of Atlanta, Sherman is going to start engaging in something called total war. And total war is destroying anything that would assist the enemy forces to remain in the field. So we're not just targeting Confederate military, we're targeting foodstuffs. We're targeting any factories. The Confederacy doesn't have a lot of factories, but they've got a few. Those factories produce things to enable the Confederates to remain in the field. Sherman is going to destroy rail lines because those rail lines are going to bring supplies as well as move armies around. And so Sherman is going to engage in this thing called total war, and this is to destroy the enemy's ability to make war. Now, that said, a lot of sort of Confederate sympathizers, Confederate apologists, sons of Confederate veterans, I like to beat up on those guys a lot, are going to argue that Sherman's forces, as they commit to their march on towards the sea, are going to rape and murder and do all kinds of terrible, terrible things to the Confederate population. Some of that stuff happened because this is a mass of thousands and thousands of men in this army, but Sherman did his dangdest to prevent that stuff. If you got caught doing something like that, you are going to face some really, really bad punishment under Sherman's command. And so he was not in the slightest encouraging that stuff. He wasn't letting it happen. But that's kind of one of those sort of myths that pops up after the war. We're kind of jumping around because I want to wrap us up pretty soon. Anyway, in April of 1865, up at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Robert E. Lee's forces after Gettysburg are just dogged by the Union forces. You don't have to get him down, but Ulysses S. Grant is going to take command of all of the armies, and he is going to lead the Army of the Potomac in particular. And he is just going to relentlessly pursue Lee for really the next year and a half about. And never letting up, and Lee is just dogged through the countryside for the next year and a half. And finally, in April of 65, both armies are going to meet there at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, and Lee is going to offer to surrender. And the surrender ceremony is going to occur. You need to scribble this guy's name down. The surrender ceremony is going to occur in the parlor, basically the living room, of a civilian named William McLean. And the wildness about that is that William McLean recently moved into this house within the last couple of years. Back in 1861, William McLean used to live on what was, before it was the Battle of Bull Run, he lived on what became the battlefield at Bull Run. And a cannonball flew through his kitchen and knocked down one of the beams that was supporting the ceiling in his kitchen. And after that horrific, very, very scary event, William McLean gathered his family together and he promised them that he would take them somewhere where the war would never ever touch them again. And so they moved from what is the battlefield at Bull Run. They moved to Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, thinking that there's no way that the armies would come here. That doesn't make sense. And so they moved there, and the universe has a weird way of biting us in the butt when we say stuff. And the war literally, not completely because there's still armies in the field, but the war, for the most part, comes to a conclusion in the living room of William McLean's house. And so his line that he threw out there, that he would take the family somewhere where the war would never touch them again, the universe was listening and decided to mess with him on that. Kind of cool. The people that were in that room, the officers and other people after them, came in and were trying to buy different stuff from Mr. McLean, because this is a super monumental event, and people were stealing things from his living room. But the little table and the two chairs that Grant and Lee are sitting at, those two chairs and that table are today in the United States Smithsonian Museum of American History. So that, honestly, that when Lee surrenders to Grant, that kind of brings about the conclusion of the war. There's going to be some other Confederate generals, but they're going to surrender over the next month. No one's going to continue the fight, really. That's kind of boneheaded a lot. A couple of days after Lee's surrender, the war is definitely winding down, and Mary Todd Lincoln is going to lean on her husband. Look, the war's winding down. We can take a breath. Let's go to the theater. And so there is this kind of sigh and sort of a little bit of a relaxation. One of Lincoln's children, you don't have to get this down, one of Lincoln's children is away also in Washington, D.C. at a different theater. This kid's like 12. I think it's Robert. And he is at a different theater seeing Aladdin and His Magic Lamp, I think is the name of the play. It's basically Aladdin. But he is at a different theater seeing Aladdin and His Magic Lamp, I think is the name of that play. But the Lincolns are watching Our American Cousin. You do not have to remember the name of the play. But partway through the play, the Lincolns are up here in the presidential box, and they are joined by another couple. Henry Rathbone, Rathbone, Rathbone. Henry Rathbone and his fiancee Clara. They'll later get married. But the Lincolns are sitting in the front, and the Rathbones are sitting behind them. And at some point during the play, John Wilkes Booth is going to enter the presidential box. He'll put a pistol to the back of Lincoln's head, fire, and immediately Henry Rathbone jumps up. And he doesn't know that Lincoln's mortally wounded, but he jumps up and tries to grab John Wilkes Booth. Well, Booth had a single shot pistol, and he's going to drop that, but he does pull out a fairly large knife, and he slices Rathbone's forearm, and he cuts him all the way down to the bone. And Rathbone releases his grip, and Booth is going to jump over the rail. He'll land on the stage, possibly breaking his leg. There's a little bit of dispute over if he broke his leg right then or if he broke it later. I tend to fall into the he broke it right there. But he possibly broke his leg right there, probably, in my opinion. Yells Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, and takes off out the back of the theater, jumps on a horse, and flees. Now, this was not just John Wilkes Booth trying to kill the president. This was a larger action. I'm hesitant to call it a conspiracy. It is a conspiracy, but conspiracy kind of gets some funky connotations, Alex Jones kind of nonsense and stuff like that. But there were several other people involved in this. Let me find my cursor over here. There were several other people involved in this. And the Booth conspiracy, the objective was, scribbly down, to decapitate the federal government. Someone else was supposed to go and assassinate the vice president, Andrew Johnson. That guy, depending on your point of view, got scared and went to a bar and got drunk and didn't carry out his aspect of the plan. Andrew Johnson's a terrible president, so that's why I said that. Another person was supposed to go and attack the Secretary of State. And that guy actually did break into the house of William Seward, the Secretary of State, and hacked him all up. Hacked up his face. And fortunately, Seward had gotten into a carriage accident a couple of days before, and so he had on a big neck brace. And when the assassin, I can't remember which one, went into his room, Seward had all the blankets. It was in the middle of the night, and he had all the blankets pulled up really, really close around his face even. And so when the assassin comes in and is stabbing him, trying to slice his neck, there's this brace on him. And the guy's cutting on it, but it's getting deflected. He did take a big slash across his cheek. But anyway, so all of the rest of the conspirators, for the most part, are captured after the war. But United States troops are dispatched to try to capture John Wilkes Booth. He is a famous actor. When he appears before stage, he is known at Ford's Theater, F-O-R-D apostrophe S. That is where Lincoln is assassinated. Write that down for some reason. But Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater. Booth is known. Booth is famous, and he is known at Ford's Theater to the theater goers, the crew that are at Ford's. And so troops are dispatched to track down John Wilkes Booth. And among those troops is that gentleman right there in the large picture, Sergeant Boston Corbett. And eventually, I think it's about 14 days later, Booth is going to be cornered in a barn down in, I think it's either Maryland or Virginia. It's right there on the state line. But Booth is going to be cornered in a barn, and they are under strict orders. Do not kill John Wilkes Booth, because the leaders in the federal government know that there have been assassination attempts on other members of the government, and so they want to know exactly how big this conspiracy, this plot is. And so everybody is under strict orders. Do not kill John Wilkes Booth. We want to capture him, possibly pull out his fingernails and his toenails and question him. And so they're under orders. Well, Boston Corbett sees Booth. Booth is, everybody knows, this little cavalry unit knows that Booth is hiding out in this barn, and Booth is trying to negotiate his surrender, or at least his escape. And Boston Corbett sees John Wilkes Booth through one of the cracks in the board, and he brings his pistol up and he shoots Booth through the neck. And he's under orders. He violated orders from a superior officer, so Boston Corbett is going to be arrested. Booth is taken out of the barn, and he'll die in the early hours of the morning. But Boston Corbett is arrested, And he is questioned, hey, we told you not to do that. Why the heck did you do that? And he will later say that God told him to kill John Wilkes Booth and shoot him through the neck. And evidently that works. And Boston Corbet will be released. At least they will not press charges on him. And my guess is, and I should actually dig into the trial maybe a little bit, my guess is you can't publicly punish someone that killed the president's assassin during this time. That would be incredibly, incredibly unpopular. Most people probably look at Boston Corbet in April, May of 65 and like, this guy's a hero. He killed John Wilkes Booth, the guy that killed Lincoln. And why would we punish that? And so eventually Corbet will make his way out to Oklahoma, and we sort of lose track of him in the historical record. We talked about spirit photography in class. After the war also, and hey, cool, we're down to the last 2 slides of the semester. After the war also, we have notions of war crimes that pop up. And there are some things that happen during war that are outside the bounds of acceptable behavior. And this is where some of those ideas pop up of war crimes. We don't have, solid, hey, these are actual war crimes right now. That's an evolving idea. And the Lincoln conspirators, those people that are captured that tried to kill Seward, that tried to kill Andrew Johnson, and the other groups among them, including Mary Surratt, are going to be captured, and they will be put on trial, and they will all be hanged. That's a picture of their hanging right there. They are all hanged at the same time. Don't have to get this down, but Mary Surratt's son was involved in the plot, and he actually escapes to Europe and stays in Europe for a while, and then comes back to the United States and is not, sentenced or charged. I think he's not charged, but he definitely lives the rest of his life in freedom in the United States once he gets back. Something to scribble down that's very, very cool. I think is very cool because I'm a weird nerd. Hey, actually, don't write down Wirtz at Andersonville Prison. We did not talk about Andersonville Prison. I actually have removed that slide. So don't really worry about Henry Wirtz. We're going to skip him. But super cool. That's the house. That house right there in the other picture is Mary Surratt's boarding house that is located in Washington, D.C. And during the Lincoln conspiracy, originally they were thinking about kidnapping Lincoln, and then they moved on to assassination. But much of that was planned at Mary Surratt's boarding house there in Washington, D.C., and that's kind of why she actually does do a couple of little things to assist in the plot. There's some dispute on how much she knew. I personally feel like she kind of knew enough, but she is a Confederate sympathizer, and I feel like she did know something was going down. Whether she knew they were going to kill Lincoln or kidnap him, it's possibly a little bit up in the air. But she is going to be charged nonetheless, and she will be executed. And the planning of that, including her son, occurred at her boarding house there in Washington, D.C. The cool thing is that her boarding house is presently still standing in Washington, D.C., and it is currently a Chinese restaurant. Scribbly down the name because holy cow, cool. It is a Chinese restaurant called Wok and Roll, W-O-C-K, the wok, a big cooking vessel, and roll. On the first floor, we went to D.C., I drug my family, we're going there. The first floor is a Chinese restaurant, and then on the second floor is a karaoke lounge, which is really, really kind of cool. Last slide for the semester. At the conclusion of the war, the United States federal government is going to pass a series of constitutional amendments collectively called the Reconstruction Amendments. And these get passed 65, I think, to 66 is the 15th Amendment. Scribbly down what these things do, and I'll give you a very, very easy method to remember all of them. But the 13th Amendment is going to abolish slavery everywhere, not just in the former Confederate states. And so the border states, slavery is abolished there. Up in the northern states where there are a few, very holy cow, handful of enslaved people that fell under the gradual emancipation stuff. There's still a couple of people in that situation. Those people will be freed. So 13th Amendment abolishes slavery throughout the United States. 14th Amendment is going to grant citizenship to anyone that is born in the United States. It will also, if you take me for the second half of U.S. history, will also have a line in there offering equal protection under the law. Right now, that doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. But when we get to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s and the 70s even, equal protection under the law, that clause will really kick in for a lot of stuff. And so it will be very, very important for later. So 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States with, scribble it down, with the exception of Native Americans. It says that you're a citizen if you're born in the United States and subject to the laws of the United States government. Well, Native Americans are at this time on reservations. Those are semi-sovereign, and they're not fully under the legal authority of the United States. And so 14th Amendment does not grant citizenship to Native Americans. 15th Amendment. 15th Amendment gives voting rights to African American men. Really any male citizens, but for the most part for right now, what we're thinking is it gives voting rights to African American men. You don't have to get this down, but it says the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, creed, or previous condition of servitude. And so anybody that's born in the United States and is a man, because women don't have the right to vote yet, that you can vote. And so this is the vast majority African American men are going to be able to vote with the 15th. Super easy way to remember the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment is free citizens vote. If you can remember free citizens vote, you got this. And on the exam, one question, possibly two, will ask, hey, which amendment gives citizenship for anyone born in the United States? And if you can remember free citizens vote, you can easily remember, well, okay, citizenship for the United States, citizenship is 14th Amendment. So remember free citizens vote, and you're solid there. And so with that, that is the end of our class. I know it sounds kind of goofy, but thank you very, very much for allowing me to play for you all semester. I hope you've enjoyed the class. It's really something that I really enjoy. So, and we will cut there. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. We will also have review day, and I will be happy to answer questions then as well. And so we'll cut right there. See you in a little bit.